is an honor, a pleasure, and a privilege for me to introduce to the United Nations Movie Society the film All That's Left of You by Palestinian filmmaker, screenwriter, producer, and actress Cherien Dabis. The film spans nearly 8 decades and across generations, from the Nakba in 1948 to the present-day Israeli occupation of what remains of Palestine, an illegal, genocidal, colonial, apartheid occupation that has marred all aspects of Palestinian life, inflicting profound and indelible traumas on every Palestinian family, on an entire nation, in an endless cycle of violent dispossession, displacement, impoverishment, collective punishment, and the torment of an entire people, as so painfully witnessed by the world in these past years in Gaza and the rest of occupied Palestine. The film movingly shares the story of Palestine through the journey of one family, humanizing the men, women, and children who have been so dehumanized. It shares their joys and sorrows, their struggles and their resilience, their heritage, their will to live, their dreams of freedom and return. All That's Left of You will make you cry, and it will make you feel. But most of all, I hope it will help you to more deeply understand the gravity of the injustice done to the Palestinian people and the urgency of ending this ongoing Nakba to enable our people to finally realize justice and to live in freedom, dignity, and peace in their homeland, achieving a just solution for the question of Palestine that will be the cornerstone of true Palestinian-Israeli peace and coexistence.
Greetings, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brenda Vongova, President of the UN Movie Society. It is my privilege to introduce this conversation with film director Cherien Dabis of All That's Left of You. The film is an intergenerational epic that spans over 70 years of Palestinian history. The film uses the story of one family, led by the patriarch and his descendants, to illustrate the continuous Nakba and the evolution of Palestinian resistance and identity. This remarkable film also explores one of humanity's most profound acts of generosity, organ donation, through an intimate lens that challenges us to consider the questions of identity, legacy, connection, which transcends borders. What makes this film particularly striking is its approach. In a world where cinema often focuses on conflict and division, All That's Left of You is rooted in love, kindness, generosity, and peace. Here at the United Nations, we are dedicated to humanitarian support, human dignity, and international cooperation, and this film speaks directly to our shared values. Please join me in warmly welcoming our distinguished guest, Cherien Dabis. Cherien, thank you so much for being with us here today. You've produced one of the most heart-centered films, All That's Left of You. Tell us, what was the origins of the story and what drove you to tell this very important story?
Well, I was inspired in part by my family. My father is Palestinian from the West Bank, and he was exiled from Palestine in 1967. So a lot like the characters in the film, he had to get foreign citizenship, US citizenship, which took many years before he could return just to visit his family and the only home he'd ever known. So I grew up with his heartache over his exile and just his worry and chronic stress about what was happening back home. I grew up visiting his family with him in the West Bank and seeing him harassed and humiliated at checkpoints. And so I got these windows into occupation, and I saw my father, sort of his identity change over time as the situation worsened in his homeland. And I also, grew up with sort of the collective trauma of the Nakba, just stories that I heard of things that happened to friends of the family. And, the Nakba is really a collective trauma for all Palestinians. And it's ongoing, what began in 1948 has never really ended. So I always wanted to tell a Nakba story. And I was, inspired in part by what what I went through and what my father went through, but also, the stories that kind of lived in me, the stories that I just heard growing up. And what I really wanted to do was to tell a story about how people are impacted by the Nakba still, the kind of the ongoing impacts of the Nakba, of occupation, and how history shapes families, essentially. So the focus really is on the family and how they survive these decades of political turmoil and personal loss.
It's an extraordinary story, and thank you so much for telling this story. Tell us about that.
For me, the title is so much about kind of what the movie is about, which is love. All that's left of us at the end of the day when we've survived all of this, all of the things that kind of life throws at us. What's left of us is love, and I think that's really the way that the film ends.
Yes. And the film also discusses the issue of organ donation, which is a very sensitive topic, and when one life ends, it can bring on another life. Tell us the metaphor of the organ donation that throughout the film.
Well, there is the metaphor of a heart throughout the film, and the question of whether a heart has a nationality. Perhaps when it's beating inside of a body, it does, and this is kind of part of a discussion that we hear at the end of the film. I wanted to use the organ donation as a symbol in a way, and also to really kind of talk about how, if we're so mired in our own pain and suffering that we can't see that of another, then we're just continuing to perpetuate an increasingly violent world. We can't be so mired in our own pain and suffering that we're not seeing what we may be causing, of another, like the pain and suffering we may be causing another, or that we may be complicit in the pain and suffering of another. And I hope that through this organ donation kind of storyline in the film that, people can kind of feel that and see that, I guess it's kind of a spoiler alert, so I should maybe say that before. So if you haven't seen the movie, maybe don't listen to this part, but, I hope that, a Palestinian heart in an Israeli body at the end of the movie, I wanted that to be a metaphor of do you feel our pain now? What is it going to take for you to feel our pain, for you to see us and recognize us? And I feel like that was kind of the question that I wanted to explore in a way.
You did it powerfully.
Thank you.
Through your story.
Thank you.
And what I really appreciate about your film is how you really focus on creating a film rooted in love, kindness, and generosity, more than focusing on making a conflict film. Why did you choose to focus more on these values?
Well, my experience of being Palestinian is one of love, family, compassion, kindness, generosity, patience, conflict within the family, but certainly not political conflict. I think we Palestinians have been so politicized. We didn't ask for any of this. We have no choice but to, have deep political knowledge of what's happening because we're living it, and we become politicized because of what we've had to endure, because of the political situation that has been imposed on us for decades, but this isn't something we really asked for. And I think that, for me, I wanted to really tell a story about human beings and about the impact of the ongoing politics on people. And that was really important to me. And so this is a story about survival. And I feel like, the Palestinian people have always inspired me. Palestinians resist in all kinds of ways. And one of the ways that I see them resisting every day is by upholding their humanity, by really leading with their humanity, by choosing not to have their hearts full of hatred and rage, by recognizing that these systems of oppression want to fill us with rage and hatred, because that's how they dehumanize us. And if we allow that, obviously we have to feel what we're feeling and move through it and hopefully understand and know who we are on the other side of it, because we are love. We are love of land. We are love of our families. We are very compassionate people. And so for me, that's one of the biggest lessons that I've taken away from Palestinians living in Palestine, that they know that they have so many people have such a strong sense of who they are and such a connection to something larger than them, whether you want to call that God or whatever you want to call it. It's just, they have there's a real grace that I've seen, that really helps people get through the intense amount of ongoing suffering that they experience, and that grace is part of how they survive, and it brings some sense of meaning to that suffering. And I feel that that's really worthy to show. Sadly, the world and headlines usually render Palestinians as nameless, faceless statistics. And so we don't really ever get a sense of the Palestinian emotional experience, and we don't really ever get to see Palestinian humanity. And so I wanted to honor the humanity that I grew up with, that I see every single day, not just in my family, but in the people, at large. I feel like even the last few years, there's so many incredible stories coming out of Gaza, like journalists who've risked their lives to save other people, fathers who will risk their lives to rescue people from under the rubble. There's a lot of heroism, and we're not, I don't know why the world doesn't get to see that more often.
Yeah, you've really helped the Palestinian. I feel that through this film, you've really helped to heal the spirits in a way. And
I mean, that's amazing to hear, and I think it's hard. I started thinking about this film back in 2014 and writing it in 2020, so long before recent events. And I think that one of my intentions in writing it was to explore my own intergenerational trauma and whether it was possible to heal a trauma that's ongoing. There's no post-traumatic stress, it's just present traumatic stress. And how does one deal with that? What do you do with that? I feel like these days it's a little bit harder to talk about healing because of just the absolute devastation that we've seen in the last 2+ years. And so when I hear anyone say that the movie had some sort of healing impact on them, even if it just is momentarily, it makes me very happy.
And what's so important is the movie goes through 4 different generations of Palestinian history, so that
4 different time periods.
Yes,
exactly.
Nakba, 1948,
and then the 1970s, which was about a decade into the occupation of the West Bank, and then the late 1980s, where Palestinians had been living under occupation for 2 decades, and so there was really a sense of enough, and so we had the First Intifada, and then 2022, where we
current.
Yeah.
Or more current.
More current, exactly, where we see our kind of central couple that we follow throughout the film return to their home.
And I noticed within the 4 different periods, you oscillate between them, and you really see how the characters, each period has a different lead character. And
In a way, yeah, it does. It's funny because it's like the family is the central character, but you kind of have a slightly different focus in each time period. In 1948, I mean, really the movie is the story of a grandfather, father, and son, right? So in 1948, you really focus on the grandfather and the son who becomes the father in 1978. And then in 1978, you have the father and the son. And then in 1988, you have the father, the son, but also the wife, who becomes kind of a bigger character in that time period. And it turns out that she's the storyteller in the film. And sort of as the men become more broken, because men, Palestinian men are particularly brutalized under occupation, and very often women have to step into roles of power within the family when that happens, and attempt to heal the family in some ways, or in some way. And so that's what the female lead is attempting to do in the film. And of course, I play that.
You played it. I wanted to just congratulate you on you're an extraordinary actress.
Thank you so much.
And
thank you.
The fact that you directed and acted a very emotional character
Yeah, it is definitely an emotional role.
Yes.
It's a very emotional film. I mean, that
Yeah.
that was what I wanted to do, was really create an emotional experience for the audience so that they could really understand in some way through the film what Palestinians have had to endure, and so the only way to do that is really engage people emotionally. And it's what I love about cinema, it's the language of emotion. And emotion is how you move people to action. It's how you open people's hearts and shift their perspectives. And in some way, this is a narrative that's not really been told. The dominant narrative is the Israeli narrative.
I know.
And the Palestinian narrative has been omitted from history books. It's been actively denied. It's been censored. It's been erased. And so this is really one of the first movies of its kind, the first ongoing Nakba film that shows such a broad sweep of Palestinian history through the eyes of one family, and really takes a look at how all of these events over all of these decades have impacted people through this, the 3 generations of this one family.
You did an extraordinary job telling the story, and movies are a powerful way to teach people.
I think so. I mean, I think they're powerful
through
ways
emotion.
Yeah, exactly. Like you give people kind of an emotional education, I guess you could call it in some sense.
The production of this is really remarkable. I understand you started filming in early 2023. Your idea was to film 90% of the film in Palestine. Is that correct?
That's right. So I landed in Palestine to begin pre-production in May of 2023, so about mid-2023. And we were supposed to start shooting in October of 2023 in Palestine, 90% in Palestine, 10% in Cyprus. And, we did all the work. We spent 5 months working with our Palestinian crew on the ground. We found all of our locations. We cast the whole movie. We amassed a giant warehouse of really beautiful props and things from all of the different time periods. And then 2 weeks before we were supposed to start shooting, of course, the events of October 2023 took place, and we ended up having to evacuate, which was devastating for many reasons. I mean, we'd spent a lot of money in Palestine. We'd done a great amount of work. But more than that, we had to leave our Palestinian crew behind. And we were just thrust into total uncertainty. We didn't know if we'd be able to continue making the film. We were in a bit of a financial crisis at that point. The money we spent in Palestine was gone. We couldn't shoot there. And we had to start completely over. And at that point, we had to basically recreate Palestine outside of Palestine, which is quite a bit more expensive than actually shooting in Palestine. So our budget, went up quite a bit, and we were constantly looking for more financing to get going or to start over. And it was physically draining, emotionally draining, because we found ourselves making a movie about what was happening as it was happening. We're making a movie about the Nakba as we're witnessing a much larger Nakba take place right before our very eyes, and some days we're shooting scenes that look an awful lot like what's coming across our news feeds, what's coming out of Gaza. And so it really was an incredibly intense emotional experience. And I think, in some ways, we were all so grateful to have the film because we poured ourselves into it, to be able to create at a time of such destruction and feel like, okay, we're making something that could make a difference. This story just became infinitely more relevant and vital, and we wanted to get it out into the world as soon as possible. Yeah. So we just worked night and day to keep going.
You're so resilient, and that was a huge challenge to shoot.
It was.
Palestine.
Yeah, to shoot Palestine outside. I mean, we ended up going to Jordan, where we shot in the Palestinian refugee camps in the north. We shot more than 50% of the film there, and just we got so much support from the Royal Film Commission and Runa Nasser, who's an amazing line producer there, and they came right in and got to work. So that was an amazing experience, and to get to work with the Palestinian refugee community was also great. We were planning to do that in Palestine, but we still got to do that in Jordan, so that was really great. And then we finally finished the film in Greece, and we still managed to get some shots in Palestine. So it did end up becoming kind of a multi-country, like 4-country shoot, international production.
How is it to work with UNRWA? for our UN audience?
You know, we didn't work directly with them. I am on the board of UNRWA USA, which, you know, they're a phenomenal organization. And we did shoot one of the Palestinian refugee camps that we shot in is supported by UNRWA. And we were there when their funding was pulled, which was devastating for so many people in the refugee camp. You know, they don't have Jordanian papers. They don't have the ability to work in Jordan. So they were really, this particular camp was really dependent on aid from UNRWA. So I learned so much just being in that community at that time and hearing those stories and hearing how deeply impacted Palestinian refugees from that camp were at that moment. Like that was a very scary moment for them. And
when you were trying to shoot Palestine outside of Palestine, how did you try to maintain authenticity? And because I know it's hard, it was probably very hard to recreate Palestine outside of Palestine.
It was definitely challenging. I mean, it became much more challenging. But, you know, shooting in Jordan, you know, Jordan is, we found amazing places that looked very similar to what we, you know, like the locations that we had in Palestine and really what we wanted. So it was great to be able to go there, and you know we shot more than 50% of the film there, so that was super helpful. It was a bit more challenging in Cyprus and Greece, and you know I luckily had a lot of Palestinian crew. My production designer is Palestinian, and you know I really relied on him and the crew to help me make it as authentic as possible, to find the right locations and then to kind of dress them so that they looked as authentic as possible. And authenticity, you know, is incredibly important to me. You know, when your stories aren't really being told and your people are being dangerously misrepresented and you know, dehumanized in media, like really telling our authentic stories becomes that much more important. So we had to do quite a bit of work on a lot of the locations in Cyprus and Greece to make them really look and feel like they were in Palestine. So it was a much bigger crew. It was a bigger art department. It was a lot more effort on their part to get all of that right. And they just did an absolutely fantastic job.
It was truly authentic.
Yeah,
Very meticulously done. And
I'm so grateful.
Detailed.
I have a lot of Palestinians have seen the film, and I can't believe that they actually have no idea that it's not shot in Palestine, which is amazing. I think there's maybe only like one shot that maybe gives away. It's when the characters are in Haifa, and we shot that in Athens, and Athens doesn't look that much like Haifa. So that I think that's like the one shot that, you know, where someone might notice, but I don't know that anyone has.
Yeah, so you did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
How was post-production? I know you wrapped up, and then shortly after you were racing to get it perfected for Sundance.
For Sundance,
so
that's right.
how was that process?
Oh my
after
gosh.
being exhausted from the production, then you were thrown into post-production.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, we spent that 5 months in Palestine prepping the film, and then only to evacuate and have to start over. And so, you know, that 5 months alone was exhausting, like prepping
I can imagine.
in occupied territory, going in and out of checkpoints, moving in and out of the airport, being stopped, interrogated, all these things. And then starting over, and then having to re-prep. And then finally, from the time we started shooting until the time we wrapped was 11 months.
Yeah.
Because of all the stopping and starting, needing to raise more money, figure out where we're going, you know, needing to re-prep this other location, this other country that we're now shooting in. So it was like 2 years of work before we finally, you know, almost 2 years of work before we got into post-production. And it was just a total race to get to the finish line, to get to Sundance on time. You know, we were just racing, working around the clock, and you know, a lot of post-production took place in Berlin, and the whole thing was just utter madness. When I got to Sundance, it just felt so surreal to be there. Like I was just in shock that the movie was done because it all happened so fast, you know?
You're a great leader.
Thank you. Thank you.
You made it happen.
It was,
you have the resilience,
definitely a lot of
leadership
effort. Thank you. I mean, I think that this movie taught me that. Like, it forced me into this leadership position where I had to make really challenging decisions on behalf of like a big crew. You know, there were almost 500 people who worked on this film from all over the world, from Germany, Greece, Cyprus, Jordan, Palestine, you know, and I'm probably forgetting places, but it was the effort of hundreds of people all over the world.
Incredible.
And it was incredible. Yeah. And, you know, I felt the weight of every decision and the responsibility of every decision, especially with a film like this, where you're depicting different periods of Palestinian history that have never before been seen in cinema.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and we are so proud that your film has been selected as Jordan's official submission for the Best International Feature Film Oscar.
That's right.
This year. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you so much.
How does that feel?
I mean, it feels really exciting. You know, it feels really exciting for so many reasons. You know, it's so funny because when we had to evacuate Palestine, it's almost as if the film at that point like lived what any Palestinian refugee lives, you know, war, exile, displacement, waiting to return, because we kept thinking like, oh, things will quiet down in Palestine and maybe we can go back and maybe we can go back and maybe we can shoot the last part of the film there. And it just, things escalated and escalated. So I'm really happy to represent Jordan, which is, you know, there's so many Palestinians there and so many Palestinian refugees. So to tell kind of this Palestinian epic that's representing Jordan feels appropriate, you know? And I'm just really happy, you know, for the Palestinian people and for Palestine that I can also be, you know, shortlisted among 3 Palestinian films. You know, I'm one of 3 Palestinian films that have been shortlisted for the Oscars this year, and that just makes me really happy for all Palestinians. You know, that it feels like, in some ways, people want to support our stories and our voices right now, and I think that's important. I mean, you know, it's sad that it took a genocide to get there, but I'm, you know, at least
you have a voice.
At least we have a voice, and people are listening, and people are kind of waking up to the injustices.
Yeah. For our UN international audience, what would you like for them to take away from seeing this film?
You know, I think that I hope that the film makes people introspective and question where they are as far as whether they're really leading with their humanity. Like, you know, I feel like the film kind of makes us at the end ask the question of whether we would do what the characters do at the end of the film, like whether we would have the grace or the humanity to kind of make that same decision. And I think that's kind of an important takeaway, you know, that people have communicated to me that that's something that, you know, that they're thinking about at the end of the film. And I think aside from that, I just hope to kind of open people's hearts with this film and maybe show them a perspective, an emotional perspective that they might not be aware of. You know, I think that the UN community is probably more aware than the general population of the actual events and things that have happened in Palestine. You know, the facts on the ground and the statistics. But I'm not, you know, I don't know how much any one of us has gotten to immerse ourselves in the emotional experience of how people are really changed by what happens, and how generations of people are changed, and really how the trauma is really being passed down in this way that will never end unless we are able to do something. And I hope that the UN community, in seeing this story, this epic story, that is, you know, it's the story of one Palestinian family, that is the story of all Palestinian families, really. You know, I hope that in seeing this, there can be more of a recognition of Palestinian suffering, because I think that we have to be able to recognize all of the injustices. We really have to, at a minimum, be able to recognize what Palestinians have been through, you know, and otherwise there's no way that we could ever have a just peace. And I think that the film, you know, in some ways, I hope that it makes us introspective as far as like really looking within our own hearts to see, like, to be honest about what biases we may have, where we may need to do a little bit more work. I feel like, I don't know, the Palestinian people and the amazing humanity that I've seen inspired me to make this film, because I've learned so much from the grace of the Palestinian people in the face of oppression. And I really think that the world can learn from the Palestinian people.
Cherien, thank you so much. You really produced this epic, heartfelt film for the international community.
Thank you.
And you are truly resilient. The fact that you even completed this film at all really shows your resilience and humanity. And you're a true leader, and I really appreciate how you created a film that's really rooted in kindness, love, and generosity. And for our UN international community, this is so important, and it really gives us purpose for the work we do.
That's great to hear.
On behalf of the UN Movie Society, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.